after. So, okay, so now we're recording. And I will be checking the chat throughout, so feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my presentation mode. Okay, so this is the main point of the training today, the main overview of the Grant Writing 101 training today. We're going to talk about who gives money for what and what they're looking for, how to get that funding, and then overall financial strategy for your nonprofit or business. I should also say that we don't send out these slides, but you can take a screenshot, and I'll say a couple of times where I'm listing specific grants that are coming up that you might want to take a screenshot or make sure you're taking notes of what's coming up. So where do grants come from? There's a few different places that give out grants. So anything from a foundation. So here in Western North Carolina, we have the WNC Community Foundation. Statewide, there's the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. Governments also, federal, state, local, give out funding. So Western Women's Business Center, we get grants from Buncombe County Strategic Partnership, the City of Asheville Community Development Block Grants. Companies also, especially in the last year with the crisis going on, a lot of companies wanted to show that they were giving support when they could to businesses that were impacted by the pandemic. So Lowe's actually did several rounds of this $25 million in funding to minority-owned businesses. That included people of color and women in that minority-owned businesses. And then they also did another round that was for rural businesses specifically. And they are headquartered here in North Carolina. So there's a connection there to, supporting businesses in North Carolina and, where they're headquartered. But this was a national program. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about some that are coming up. So, not only ones that are in the past. Blue Cross and Blue Shield also was giving out funding to businesses impacted by COVID, and so was Facebook. And as this drags on, there might be, more rounds of funding that are coming from companies that want to support businesses impacted by COVID. There's also other types of organizations. So here in Asheville, we have a group called CoThink, which is a community giving circle specifically for people of color run initiatives. There might be other community giving circles in places that you are for specific issues like rural business development, something like that. So basically there's a lot of different types of organizations that give grants. And why do those businesses give grants? There's a few different reasons. One is that they actually care about making a difference and want to see an impact in their community. They want to give back. Another is that they want to look good, right? Good PR. Sometimes that's why we see, big corporations giving money out, because they want to show that, that they care, that they're a good company. It creates good PR, good community will, or they're required to. So sometimes, like in the case of the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water. That funding came from the tobacco lawsuits, and R.J. Reynolds tobacco money was basically what was made to create the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation. So sometimes they're required to, sometimes they want to, sometimes it makes them look good. And the reason I'm going through this is because just like when you're making a sale for your business, it's important to know the motivation behind the funder and what problem they're trying to solve. So in small business, we talk about, what problem you're solving for the customer, the value proposition, and it's the same thing for writing a grant, right? What are you contributing that is going to meet what their goals are, and understanding their motivation. So what are they looking for? So they're looking to fund things that will show a positive impact in the community. They want confidence that you're going to do a good job with their money. So most of the time there's a ton of people applying for the same funding. Only a small percentage of them are going to get that funding. So how do they know that you're the group, the small business, the nonprofit that's going to do a good job with that money? And the funder wants the ability to tell a good story about what you're doing and how they're helping. So at Western Women's Business Center, for example, we are a nonprofit, and we provide all those services I went over in the beginning. And we want to have client success stories so that we can show our impact. And that's what continues to get us funding, what continues to get us grants. And all of our funders want to know, tell me one story about one person that you helped, how you made a difference. Any questions so far? Amy, you can unmute if you don't have to put it in the chat.
You mentioned, I'm sorry, you mentioned that the Z. Smith Reynolds Foundation, it's kind of big tobacco, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is their motivation, or is there like a goal of theirs to help people quit smoking cigarettes? Is that why they launched this?
It's really interesting because it's not always a direct correlation like that. So they do not have a goal related to that, but they do have a goal related to promoting healthy communities and economic development that's not tobacco, right? So there used to be, tobacco was the big industry in North Carolina. That's what employed a lot of people, all of that kind of stuff. Now that is mostly gone because people have stopped smoking and all of that. So they're looking for how to do economic development and promote healthy communities after, I don't know how to say it, but after, tobacco has declined. Does that make sense? So it's not always like a direct one-to-one correlation.
Gotcha.
But if you did have an initiative around quitting smoking or vaping, since, more people are vaping now, whatever, then
I probably, as a very progressive registered nurse with a holistic background, I probably would never source funding from anything related to the Reynolds Foundation. I just was curious because my what I'm trying to do is like definitely to help the community in and around Buncombe County and Asheville, and to really try to figure out how we can address addiction. And unfortunately, we have been a refugee state. By that, I mean, like, we are one of the last states to access medical cannabis. And, one of the things that a lot of us medical professionals can prove is that there's up to a 35% reduction rate in mortality from cradle to grave. That means from newborns being born addicted to narcotics to elderly addicted to narcotics. Like, so we're one of the last refugee states. So that's one of the things I'm trying to do is like create education to address addiction and how we can create that funding on a state level, So
that's great.
I didn't mean to take that much time, but like, I will ask questions later and probably schedule an appointment with you guys. But I'm just like, wow, there's got to be other organizations that aren't BIPOC related, and because I'm white, I would love to team up with other nurses that are BIPOC or trans even or whatever, but have the same goal. So I'll get off the mic right now. Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent. But it's good to know the difference between these organizations that could really get behind something with like a humanistic or a holistic kind of impact, and which money to source, because that's a lot of money, I'm guessing, from the Reynolds Foundation. But there is a lot of money in Asheville because there's a lot of rich people here.
That's right. Well, thank you. And I do think, like, for everyone, it's a great idea to schedule a one-on-one appointment, and we can go through these ideas of how do you want to set up. So and I'm going to have some slides on this in a minute, but should you be a nonprofit? Should you be a for-profit? what are the ways to get revenue based on those different setups, those different, you know, types of organizing, and also we might know about funding that I'm not going through here. So for example, Rural Forward North Carolina does a lot of work on addiction, and funding it. Whatever it is your issue that you're working on, I'm going to give you some resources for finding grants for that specific thing. And you can also just, you know, do your own research, just Google, you know, addiction treatment funding North Carolina, you know, or national or whatever. So I'm going to give you some different resources for that. So no matter what you're working on, addiction or any of the other types of initiatives that you guys brought up, this process is going to apply for you. So thank you, Amy.
Jared, what was the one you just mentioned, Rural Forward Initiative?
Rural Forward North Carolina. So they are also an organization that has worked on the addiction crisis in rural areas and have a lot of resources for support with that. And
awesome, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so getting the money. So the most important thing to start with is getting clarity on what is your vision.
You're on mute, Tara.
Thank you. That's the quote of 2020 into 2020,
Yeah.
right?
You were saying, what is your mission?
Thank you, Rocio. Rocio is our Latino program director for the state of North Carolina at our same organization, Carolina Small Business Development Fund. So I know there was one person on who is working on domestic violence in the Latinx community in Henderson County. So Rocio would be a great connection for you too. Okay, so start by getting clarity on what is your vision? What is it that you need funding for? So those two things really go together. What is it that you want to be accomplishing? And you know, there's some initiatives here that might be more nonprofit or some that might be more, you know, small business. So I said vision because it's broad enough to sort of hold both of those. But what really is your goal for your specific project or business? And then within that, what do you need funding for? Do you need a website? Do you need equipment? Do you need money for salaries and people? Make sure that you're making a list of those expenses. This is especially for people that haven't started yet. But if you have started and you're looking for funding for a new stage of growth or sustaining what you're doing, it's also equally important to know exactly how much you need, because when you start researching grants, you'll see a lot of them are $5,000, right? For a small business, $10,000. Is that the right amount of money for you? Is that going to be enough to sustain what you're doing to help you meet your goals? And if not, how else are you going to get funding? Or do you need to go for the bigger grants that are $100,000 or something like that? So it's really important to, I think we all are just kind of in the mindset of, I need as much money as possible. Where can I get money? But really sitting down, putting pen to paper, making that budget, because any grant is going to ask for the budget of, you know, what you need funding for. It's really important to get clear on how much you need. And I think I already went over this, but what other ways do you have to access the money? So if you go through and you say, okay, I need $50,000 to start my business or my nonprofit, whatever it might be, and you find that, you know, there's grants for $10,000, how can you get the rest of the $40,000 that you might need? Is it a business loan? Is it sales? Is it investing your own money? So that's really important to think about. And then these are more nonprofit questions, but what are the goals for your organization? How will you serve and how? So this can be for a small business or a nonprofit. and what impact do you have in the community? So these are very basic things that any grant is going to ask for. So it's good to get clarity on them up front so that when you're researching what funding is available, you can see what funding matches what you're looking for, an amount, what you're able to do, what you want to do. And a problem that people run into with grants a lot is sort of contorting what they want to do to fit in with what the funder will give money for. So you'll think, oh, instead of doing, you know, this initiative, so I'm just going to do addiction treatment. Like instead of, you know, doing a halfway house, which has been my goal of what I want to start, I'm seeing that people are giving a lot of money for harm reduction services and addiction. So instead of doing what my goal really is, I'm going to go over here and chase the money to, you know, to do this other thing. That's not a real example, but I'm just coming up with it off the fly, you know, of how sometimes you can say, well, I want to work in this field, but the money is really over here. So I'm going to change what my vision is to get the money. And that may or may not be the right decision for you. So it can be really, really important to get clear on what it is that you want to be doing before you start looking for funding. So what type of organization are you? So small businesses in general are expected to rely on profits from your products and services. So in general, throughout history of small businesses, grants for this are very rare. So Laura has been here for 2 years. I've been working here for 2 years. We always get small businesses coming in and saying, I want funding, where can I get a grant to start a small business? And until the last year, we usually said, there's not a lot of grants available for small businesses. Let's talk about what other ways that you can get services. But since the last year, there have been more. So I'm going to go over those. But just in general, know that if you're starting a small business, grants are rare. You can get them, but it's not going to be the thing that will sustain you, you know, through the whole life and success of your business. So if you organize as a nonprofit, funding typically comes from grants, but it's also important to have other resources because grants are temporary. They can be hard to come by. A funder can say, sorry, we funded you for 5 years, but now we're not funding you anymore. So it's really important to, you know, diversify where your funding is coming from. So Western Women's Business Center, just as an example of a nonprofit, we get funding from basically 5 grants, which is great because we're not just relying on one funder to keep us going. If one of them decides, you know, they don't want to give money anymore, we're okay. And then we also have an annual conference where we get sponsorships and sell tickets. And so money from that also goes to sustaining our nonprofit. Some other nonprofits might charge for classes or services. Obviously we don't, this is all free to you. But some nonprofits might decide to do that. Other nonprofits might sell t-shirts or, you know, merchandise. So there are other ways, even if you're a nonprofit, to keep money coming in, not from grants. So just a note on that. There are also other ways to organize. So if you're a business and you see a grant available, you might be able to get a nonprofit to fiscally sponsor you. So in the last year, for example, Dogwood Health Trust, which is another funder of healthy initiatives in our area for anyone looking for that, Dogwood Health Trust put out a racial equity grant. And we were able to help, and they have many other types of funding too. So it's not limited to racial equity, but we had a couple of businesses that we were working with. One was a yoga studio and one was a like a health education service basically. And they are both organized for profit, but we were able to get a nonprofit to sponsor them so that they could get the grant, because those are both, you know, community services that are important, and we were able to do that. So There might be some kind of wiggle room that you can think about as you're researching and that we could support you with. There's also other types of social enterprise organizations. So here locally, there's Pisgah Legal Services that has helped entities start in a way that might not exactly be a nonprofit, not exactly be a small business, but a combination of the two. So there's, for example, Green Opportunities locally does workforce training, if you're familiar with them. But they were able to start a for-profit business in addition to their nonprofit organization to sort of help fund the nonprofit. So there are, some third options out there other than being organized, as a small business or a nonprofit. I just wanted to put them out there, and we can either help you navigate that or connect you to resources that are better at it than we are, like the legal experts at Pisgah Legal Services. I'm going to check the chat really quickly. Oh, somebody asked me to flash the prior slide for a second. So Nicole, at the end, whatever it is that you wanted to see again, I can go back. Then there's a question. I live in Eastern North Carolina, but do work all over the state. Are these grants based where we live? So there will be grants that are very local, to a city, to a neighborhood, to a county, or there will be grants that are national, grants that are statewide. So as we're going through here, just think about what might apply to you. You can be, for example, Western Women's Business Center works across 24 counties, but we have one grant that is just for Buncombe County and one grant that is just for the city of Asheville. So you can work in a larger region and get funding for smaller regions for specific initiatives. So just something to think about. We are not unfortunately able to provide the PowerPoint after the session, but I will send the recording. And if you have specific questions about things that were presented, we're happy to talk to you about that. Okay. So how do you get the money? So the most important step is to research what is out there. Who gives grants for what it is that you need? So that's when I said, just type in Google. I'm going to show you a couple of databases for finding grants in a minute. So, so know that that's coming. Once you see who gives grants for the type of thing that you're interested in, look at what are the eligibility requirements. So most of the time they're going to say, we only give money to for-profit businesses, or we only give money to a nonprofit that is a registered 501c3, or, so it's going to be broken down. And if it is for small businesses, they'll say, you can have to have 2 employees, or you can be a solo operation, or you have to have less than this amount of revenue, or you have to have more than this amount of revenue, so definitely look at those eligibility requirements and see if you fit in. And it's not like applying for a job where you might look at a job application where they ask for 10 things and you have 5 of them, so you go ahead and apply. If you don't meet the eligibility requirements for the grant, it's not for you. Now, there might be, like I was saying, a way that you can kind of navigate around it. So if they say you have to be a nonprofit, you might still be able to get it with a nonprofit sponsor, something like that. But when you submit the application, you have to have all of the eligibility boxes checked. Also think about, what are my chances of getting the grant? So let's say, like the Lowe's example, right? So Lowe's is giving grants, $25 million to businesses all across the country. Hundreds of thousands of businesses are going to be applying. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply, but let's say you're thinking about a lot of other things that you have going on, and is it worth your time? It might be something to think about. Or if you're comparing two grants, you know, one that's local and is going to have less applicants, you might have a better chance of getting it. Maybe you know someone at the organization who gives out the funding, something like that, versus, you know, a big national grant that a ton of people are going to apply for. You might just want to weigh your options in terms of thinking about what to apply for. Not saying don't apply, but, you know, just if you have other things going on and are deciding what to do. Another thing to think about is how much reporting and compliance you'll have to do. So people will say, you know, oh, a grant, it's free money, you know, that's just what I need, money that I don't have to pay back. But some of them will require, you know, a report every 4 months or every 3 months, every quarter, about what it is that you're doing. They'll want to come visit your business or nonprofit. You know, you're going to have to report to them financial information every quarter or so. Some of them are better or worse at the amount of reporting and compliance. So Dogwood, for example, we just got a grant from them. We don't have to report anything until the end of the year, which is great. So we get 12 months of funding, we get the money up front and don't have to report anything for a year. This goes into the next question. What happens if I don't meet the terms of the grant? This is really important. So some grants are going to want to see that you spent the money up front and did what you said you were going to before they give you the grant money. Some of them will give it to you ahead of time, or maybe in 2 chunks, one in the beginning, one at the end, one in the beginning, one in the middle. But it's just really important to think about what's going to happen if you don't do, if something comes up. I know we all have good intentions and all of that, but if something comes up and you don't meet the terms, what's going to happen? Especially for the ones where you have to spend your money up front to be reimbursed. Ooh. And then what is the timeline for the funding? So let's say, you know, you're thinking, okay, I'm ready to start this business. Spring is coming. The weather's getting nicer, you know, vaccine is here. I think I'm really ready to start this business in April, right? And so you start looking at what grants are available. You see there's a grant due in March. You're like, great. But sometimes when you apply for something in March, you're not really going to get it for another 6 months. So just think about when the funding is coming in, because a lot of times you'll be applying for money now thinking, okay, great, I'm ready to get started, but it's not going to come for a little while. And that goes into your overall funding strategy. So it, you know, grants can be great, but just knowing, not relying on them totally, and just knowing that you have other resources coming in to support you in the meantime while you wait. Wow, I just did a time check, and I'm gonna hold questions to the end just so we can get through this, because I think it still have a lot to go that's important for you guys to hear. But please put your questions in the chat and then we'll just get to them at the end. So where do I find grants? So I mentioned Dogwood Health Trust a few times. So this funding came from when, if you're from the Asheville area, when Mission Health sold from a nonprofit to being a for-profit. The proceeds from that sale went into this trust, Dogwood Health Trust, and they're supposed to be giving that money back to the community. So if you have a healthcare related thing, you know, this is a really great place to look. But they also have this really great list of grants for all different topics. So this is one of the most comprehensive databases that I've seen for funding in our area, but also nationally. So they have this list right here. So some potential sites to explore for grants include grants.gov, Grants Alert, Grant Watch, Candid. So there are all kinds of grants databases out there. I'm not going to go through every one, but just know that these are available to you. And then in particular, Dogwood Health Trust also puts out this list of funding opportunities, and it's not just for health related things. It's for all different types of funding for small businesses and nonprofits both. So I was just scrolling through here earlier and I saw this grant, for example, the application already passed, but it's a rural relief small business grant from LISC. So there's 39 pages of grant opportunities like this in here that they put out every single month. So it's a really great, I'll go ahead and put this web link in the chat. And it's a really, really, really great resource just to look for funding for all types of opportunities. There is a question that I'll go ahead and answer. Is there a grant research site specifically for small businesses in development with the nonprofit extension arm? So I think, unfortunately, the grant research sites are really, it's not unfortunate, but the way that it is that the grant research sites are really general, but that means they have a whole lot of resources. So there isn't one site that's for researching grants for small business versus nonprofit versus whatever, versus, you know, the specific type of issue. But they are very searchable for whatever it is that you're looking for, if that makes sense. So I wish there was one resource for everything, or one resource for, you know, each specific type of issue, but there isn't. I will say this next tip: follow pages and sign up for newsletters for small business groups, funders, and people who do similar work to you. To me, that's the most important way to get funding ideas for things that are specific to what you do. So if you have a small business in Western North Carolina, you can follow Western Women's Business Center or some of the other service providers here. Anytime that we know about a grant opportunity for small businesses in our area, or even if it's a national grant that we think that our businesses could benefit from, we're going to put it on our Facebook page, we're going to put it in our newsletter, because we want people to access that funding. There's a lot of small business resources here in Western North Carolina. So if you're not, you know, signed up for those newsletters, following those social pages, whatever works best for you, I definitely recommend doing that. So next, this is where I actually talk about grants that are actually coming up. So this is a great page to screenshot, to write down, whatever it is that works best for you. So what types of grants are available for small business? So I will say right now, what I have been seeing is that funding for small business is basically falling into these three categories, but there might be other things for your specific issue that there is funding available. It's just, you know, not falling into these three big buckets. So the first, of course, is COVID recovery. So we've seen all different types of grants come out related to this. They seem to come out randomly and not necessarily, you know, because there's been an increase in COVID and people need it or whatever. It's just whenever there's funding available. And unlike other grants, it's not really on a schedule that you can predict. So if you are a business that has been existing and has been impacted by COVID, I would just definitely recommend following all of those sites, even if you following all the small business sites, to keep track of what's available. Even if you have gotten funding for COVID related things before, you can still get additional grants most of the time. So that's when it's important to check the eligibility criteria and all of that. I'm going to show the specific application for this one in a second, but first I'll finish going through the slides. So This specific grant is for Buncombe County small businesses. If you're a solo entrepreneur, it's up to $2,500. If you are if you have more than one employee, it's up to $5,000 for this one Buncombe fund. And if you've been impacted by COVID, which I'm sure almost all of us have. The next kind of big category is innovative ideas. So in the state of North Carolina and here locally in Asheville, there's a big push to fund businesses that are going to be high growth, that are innovative, that have great new ideas. And so at the state level, there's a grant coming up called NC IDEA, or from an organization called NC IDEA. So they have both micro grants and seed grants, and that funding is coming up on March 1st. So I'm going to show those in a second too. And then locally here in Asheville, we have Venture Asheville, which gives $5,000 micro grants to businesses that have a really innovative idea that they want to spur here in Asheville to keep our creative entrepreneurial ecosystem going. And then the last sort of category, because of what has happened over the last 6 months with movements for racial equity and all of that, I feel like there are lately more racial equity grants available. So if you are an initiative that is run by people of color, that might be a great thing to look into. Like I mentioned, we help some businesses get funding through Dogwood. We also just wanted to highlight that there's a local giving circle co-think, and their grants will open in August. So that's a little ways away and for a specific group. So I'm not going to go into that, but just know, for the Henderson County Initiative for Domestic Violence, that might just be something to think about, and we can help you research those if you need support. So I'm going to go ahead and show what some of these actually look like. So I'm going to ask, I know I normally like to be a lot more participatory, but there's so many people on that it's been a little challenging, but I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you've ever seen a grant application or completed a full grant application. Okay. I'm seeing a couple, just a few hands. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and show you one since I'm only seeing a few hands. So this is for the one Buncombe grant that is due on March 1st. So this is local for businesses, like I said, that have been impacted by COVID-19. And it's up to $5,000. And I just want to show you all of the pages of things that they're going to ask you about. So I talked earlier about eligibility criteria. It's going to be different for each grant. And here you can see the eligibility criteria for this. So you have to have been in business before October. You have to be based in Buncombe County, no more than 25 employees. So it's definitely important, like I said, critical to check that you meet all of these before you submit. It's going to ask you for your contact information. And then it's going to ask you for your financials. So when we went back to why does, a funder want to fund, why do they want to give money? In this particular case, it's because they want to help businesses impacted by COVID, of course. And I talked about how there are probably a lot of people applying for this funding. So they want to make sure that it's going to businesses that have a real need, that they can feel good about having made an impact and help businesses that really needed it. So to get to that, they're going to ask you, what were your 2020 annual gross revenues? What were your expenses? And please describe how COVID has negatively impacted your business. What's the current state of your business? what other COVID disaster funding have you gotten? So they might decide that they want to give funding more to people that haven't gotten other types of COVID, but COVID, funding support, but you can still apply for this. And then they want to know about your business. And then that's pretty much it. So this grant is relatively short. It's a relatively small amount of money, right? $2,500 to $5,000 compared to some grants that might be, $1 million or something like that. So I just wanted to show an example of what an actual grant application looks like. Some of the other ones that you are applying for, again, might ask for much more about what is your vision, what are your goals, right? This is specifically for businesses impacted by COVID, but if it's more on the side of what we talked about with, sorry, I have too many tabs open, I'm trying to see more about what we were talking about with the NC IDEA or the Venture Asheville. Their questions are going to be much more about, tell us about your innovative idea, tell us about how this is going to make a difference, tell us about the money that you've invested. So of course the questions are going to totally depend on what the funding is for, but I did just want to show one example for those who haven't actually seen a grant application before. And then we have Deborah in the chat offering to help if organizations are needing support, want to do some peer-to-peer learning. That is great. Let me do a quick time check. Whoa, 10 minutes left. Okay. So again, this is a great slide to screenshot. I'll just give another second for that before I move on. And I'll do a quick example of some of the examples from funding for more of the innovation, right? So Venture Asheville and NC IDEA are two organizations that are trying to fund innovative ideas in the state. So this is an example from what Venture Asheville funded in April of 2020. So these are all of the local businesses. I think they do, Buncombe and Haywood, it says it right here. So Buncombe and Haywood. So these are all local businesses. So just a couple of highlights. So they funded this company called Cardstock, which is a custom greeting card and gift kiosk based technology. So this is actually a Western Women's Business Center client as well. They funded Helios Sanitizer Company. So of course, in April of 2020, the hand sanitizer was suddenly a really big demand, and this company was doing it with plant-based ingredients using solar-powered mobile distribution stations. So they were doing it in a way that was eco-friendly, meeting this like huge demand that suddenly had emerged. Higher powered staffing. So this is a business that comes to our African American Business Association a lot and does important work here in the region. So they do employment placement services for recovering and re-entering citizens. So you can see that they're both interested in funding innovative ideas and things that are giving back to the community. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that funders want to be able to tell a good story about what they gave their money to, and knowing that they're making an impact. Even though these are all for-profit businesses, they still want to know that they're making an impact in the community. So we also have math tutoring, and the last one I'll say is Story Vault. So this is a video platform that allows people to record stories that they want to tell their descendants. So this is an idea by Jay Hackett. You might also know Jay Hackett as the founder of Grind Coffee House, the first Black-owned coffee house in Asheville. But this is another business idea that he had to record memories for our descendants, which I think is really sweet. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick check. Okay, so just a few more slides. I'm going to run through these quickly. So the application process, know that every grant is different. Like I said, I showed you one example, but every grant is going to have different requirements. Some of them, you know, I showed you an example of a written application, but some are actually moving more towards video applications, because a lot of people are better at telling their story speaking than they are writing. And it's been a barrier for some people who aren't as great at writing, but still have a really great idea and are going to be able to execute, but just aren't that great at grant writing. It's been, you know, a barrier for them to get funding. So you might actually see some video applications out there. And if that's a better way to present for you, then definitely go with that. They're going to vary in how complex and demanding they are. So the example I showed you was a very simple grant application relative to other grant applications, right? They just want to make sure you've had a COVID impact and that you meet the criteria for the requirements. There's also big ranges in the amount of money and when you'll receive it. So I did go through that a little bit earlier. So writing a successful application. So I definitely recommend using the language of the funders in your application to show that you are the project that they're looking for. So you will see, you know, a multi-page description of what it is that they care about and what it is that they're trying to do most often when you're applying for a grant. It can also be really helpful to go look at other grantees who have gotten money to see, you know, what types of projects that they're interested in funding. And definitely taking that language and incorporating it into what you say that you're going to do. So telling their language back to them, but, you know, with your own personal twist to it. Definitely important to show the impact that your project will have and the impact that their funding will have on you. So if it's a startup grant and that's going to be the funding that helps you launch your initiative, definitely showing that their money is going to make a difference. So in the COVID example, where I said, you know, they might be, I don't know this about this particular grant, but they might be interested in giving money to people that haven't gotten a lot of COVID funding, for example. Funders want to know that the money that they give is going to make a difference for your project. So not only that your project is good and meets all the criteria, but that they're going to be making a difference in supporting you. And you should also show that you're going to be financially successful. So this can be a little bit of a catch-22. It's like sometimes you have to show that you already have a lot of money and you have it together and, you know, sound fiscal management, but also that you need their money. So sometimes walking that line can be a little tricky, but that's the kind of thing that we can help navigate. Okay, so submission tips. Make a calendar of upcoming grants to apply for. So, you know, I just gave a list of grants that are due in March and April, even February. If you miss a grant deadline and it's a grant that's going to come up again, put it on your calendar for next year. I've done that before. And you'll be surprised how quickly, you know, time moves and you'll think, oh my gosh, it's already time to apply for that thing again. This is really important. If you can build a relationship with that funder, I definitely recommend doing it. So you hopefully, especially for local grants, you definitely want to avoid the first time that they're hearing about you to be that grant application. So you want them to know that you're out in the community, that you're doing good work, that you know, are good at networking, all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's a little more challenging right now with COVID, but even if you see, you know, that they have a webinar coming up, go on the webinar. If they have a newsletter, sign up for the newsletter. if you have a question, some grants will say, please don't ask us any questions, like we're overwhelmed, leave us alone. But if they don't say that, and you are able to reach out and kind of say, you know, this is my idea, would this be something you would be interested in? Something like that. It really can help to build that relationship so that they know your grant is coming, so that they know who you are. Definitely ask for help. So someone in the chat already offered, you know, they're happy to help other people move through this process. Having someone proofread, I know it's so basic, but just, you know, making sure that you're presenting yourself as well as possible, and you're conveying a really good story. And telling your ideas to someone else, just tell a friend, tell, you know, a colleague, tell your business coach you can get through Western Women's Business Center, this is my idea, this is what I want to apply for, you know, how does that sound to you? And, you know, they'll ask you more questions, they'll give you feedback, just making sure that that you're not telling your story for the first time to someone that you're asking for money. You know, we also have pitch events. We have a pitch event that we're part of called Catapult. So that can be a great way to show up and practice telling your story and get feedback. So because you came to this training, you'll be signed up for our newsletter at Western Women's Business Center, so you can get updates on that pitch event. And then this is just very basic, but really important to submit on time, submit with all the documents and attachments. Make sure to look at those early, because they might say you need 3 letters of recommendation, and that's something you definitely want to ask for, you know, weeks, months ahead of time from, you know, people that you would get them from, just to make sure that you have them on time. So that is definitely key. And then just a last tip is that you can use language from other grant applications that you've submitted, from your website, from your social media, anything else that you have on your business plan. Make it easy on yourself. Don't try to reinvent the wheel. It's really important to, you know, to make it easy on yourself, because grants are already enough work. Oh my gosh, it's already 11. If you have to get off, that's fine. Okay, this is just the last slide. So we went through a lot of this, but just in summary, you know, grants are a lot of work and can be unreliable. So it's really important to look at other ways to get money. So those can be sales and services. They can be crowdfunding like Kickstarter. We have a whole nother training on crowdfunding. So, you know, it's just a great way to think about diversifying your funding. There's Patreon for content creators and artists. There's small business loans, like I mentioned, through Carolina Small Business. So there's other ways to get money. And it's important to think about grants as one avenue, especially for small businesses. So, yeah, I'm going to stop there since we're over time, and I'm going to stop the recording so you guys can feel comfortable asking questions as soon as I find my control panel to do that. I'm going to stop sharing.
I just want to say thank you before I leave. It was very helpful.
Thank you.